Hello, this is Marriage Moments. I'm Alexander, and today I have a story for you. My son will marry an equal, not you. Her father-in-law threw money and a one-way ticket at a pregnant Clara, but 4 years later, arriving in a remote village on business, he froze on the doorstep, unable to enter. Before we begin, please let us know where you're watching from. We hope you enjoy the story. Clara Meadows found out on a Tuesday, at 5:30 in the morning, as the neighbor's washing machine was already humming through the wall. She sat on the edge of the bath in her socks, staring at 2 lines on a pregnancy test. The second line was faint, as if drawn with a pencil. She'd done the first test on Saturday and decided it was faulty. She bought 2 more expensive ones from the all-night chemist on the corner. The bathroom smelled of carbolic soap, and the dampness from a permanently wet towel on the radiator. The tap dripped. Clara had been meaning to tell her landlady, Mrs. Higgins, about the washer, but she kept forgetting. Now the drop fell with the steady beat of a metronome, and Clara found herself counting them. On the 27th drop, she stood up, dressed, smoothed the floral coverlet over the sofa bed, and put the kettle on, but didn't make a drink. She took last night's shepherd's pie from the fridge and ate it standing up, looking out into the courtyard where the caretaker was raking up the last of the autumn leaves that had emerged from under a late frost. She was the first to arrive at the pathology lab, as always. She unlocked the door, switched on the lights, put on her lab coat and shoe covers, and started the centrifuge on an empty run. It always took a while to wake up, groaning with a deep, guttural hum. Racks of test tubes with lavender caps stood in neat rows. Clara signed the logbook, sorted the requisition forms into piles, and only then allowed herself to do what she'd come in early for. She created a request under a false name. Evans, J., age 30. She drew her own blood, awkwardly with her left hand, hitting the vein on the second try. A murky bruise would later blossom in the crook of her elbow. 4 hours later, the result appeared in the system. The number in the beta HCG column left no room for doubt. Clara printed the report, folded it into a small square, and tucked it into the inner pocket of her bag, behind her travel card. All day, she didn't think about the baby. She thought about her mother. Her mum had been an NHS nurse for 31 years, and had died quietly at 54 in a 6-bed hospital ward, where someone was always moaning in the night. All that was left of her was a small leaf-shaped brooch with a green glass stone that she used to pin to her uniform, a stack of documents in a worn-out cardboard folder, and a silence. A vast, dense silence that Clara had pushed against her whole childhood. She remembered being picked up from nursery school early when she was 4, and her mother walking her home, across 2 long blocks, though they usually took the bus. She remembered unfamiliar voices in the kitchen, their neighbour, Auntie Carol, saying, "Just let it go, for heaven's sake," and her mum's sharp reply, "Not in front of the child." After that, her mother changed hospitals 3 times in 2 years, then settled into a job at a local GP practice, in the treatment room, and stayed there until she retired, never seeking a promotion. Once, near the end, when Clara was 19 and studying for her exams, her mother said something strange from her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles. "The main thing is, if something happens, don't you stay silent." I stayed silent, and it didn't make anything easier. "Mum, what are you talking about?" "Oh, nothing. Forget it. Ask the nurse to check this drip. It's starting to pull." Clara had called the nurse, fluffed her mother's pillow, and didn't ask again. 8 days later, her mother was gone, and the question hung in the air, like that single drop of water from the tap in her bathroom. At 1 o'clock, Clara texted Arthur, "We need to talk." "Tonight? 7 o'clock at the Sparrow's Nest?" He replied in less than a minute, "I'll be there." Why so formal? She looked at his words and, for the first time that day, smiled. Arthur Beaumont was a junior doctor in the same private healthcare group, the Beaumont Trust, but at a clinic on the other side of the city. They'd met a 1.5 years ago in the staff canteen queue when he saved her a spot, and she gave him her fizzy drink because she didn't like sweet things. He was one of those people for whom everything seemed to come easy, and Clara had long been waiting for the catch. But there was no catch. He'd come to her rented studio flat with a shopping bag that always contained something extra, an expensive cheese, a torch, a book about British birds. He fixed her curtain rail and slept with his feet hanging off her short sofa. He rarely spoke about his father, and when he did, it was brief. Alistair Beaumont owned the Beaumont Trust, 14 clinics, a central laboratory, and a diagnostic centre. Clara had seen him twice, both times from a distance at company-wide meetings. He was tall, with silver hair and rimless glasses, and when he spoke, The entire auditorium held its breath. At 7, she was sitting by the window in the sparrow's nest, warming her hands on a paper cup she hadn't opened. A fine drizzle was falling outside, and people were hurrying home from work, their collars turned up. At 1:15, the door opened with a jingle of a small bell, and Alistair Beaumont walked in. He wore a dark overcoat, its shoulders damp, and carried no umbrella. He scanned the room calmly, as if looking for a reserved table rather than a person, and sat down opposite her. He didn't take off his coat. "Good evening, Miss Meadows," he said. "Arthur flew out this morning at 7. A conference, followed by a 2-week placement at a partner clinic in Switzerland. An excellent opportunity. He'd been asking for it." Clara put her cup down. "He would have told me." "He did. Your message simply didn't go through. Some issue with his international roaming." Alistair took off his glasses, polished them with a handkerchief, and put them back on. "Let's not waste time. On the 22nd of April, a beta HCG test was run in your laboratory. The request was made out for a Jane Evans, age 30. The contact number on the form was yours, 8 weeks. Am I correct?" At the next table, a young couple was laughing at something on their phone. A waitress was wiping down the counter. Clara heard it all with perfect clarity, and for some reason, she noticed that one of his shirt cuffs was missing a cufflink, the button held on with white thread. "You are having me investigated. I investigate everyone who gets close to my son. It's not an insult, it's a policy." He took a thick white envelope from his inner pocket, placed it on the table, and pushed it towards her with 2 fingers. A train ticket followed. "There's enough here for you to not have to worry about anything for 3 years. The ticket is for the day after tomorrow, the 1940 train. You'll have to get a bus from there, but you'll figure it out." Clara didn't touch either the envelope or the ticket. "I'm pregnant with your son's child, not some stranger's." "I know," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "My son will marry an equal, not you." The sudden, dismissive familiarity in his tone was worse than a shout. "An equal to whom?" Clara asked. "To you?" To himself. "He needs a woman he can spend 30 years with and never look back. Not some lab technician from a council flat whose mother spent her life cleaning bedpans in a treatment room. My mother was a senior nurse." "Was," he said, then paused. "Meadows, is that your mother's name or your father's?" "My mother's. I never knew my father." And then something happened that Clara wouldn't be able to explain for a very long time. Alistair placed his hand flat on the table, as if to stop it from trembling. It was there for a second, maybe a second and a half. He immediately shoved his hand back into his coat pocket. "Meadows," he repeated, his voice dropping half a tone. "I see. What do you see?" "Nothing." He stood up and fastened the top button of his coat. "Take the envelope. If you don't take it today, you'll never get another chance, and you're going to need it. And another thing, don't write to him. He won't reply, and you'll only torture yourself. Consider yourself lucky you found all this out now, and not in 10 years' time." He left, the bell above the door jingling twice. Clara sat at the table until 8:30. She never did drink her coffee. Then she shoved the envelope and the ticket into her bag, next to the folded lab report, and walked home, all 6 bus stops. That same evening, Alistair went up to his office on the 9th floor, not turning on the main light. Rebecca Shaw was waiting for him by the window, her hands folded over a file. "Is it done?" she asked. "It's done." He poured himself a glass of water from a carafe and drank it in one go. "Her name is Meadows, Clara Meadows." Rebecca raised an eyebrow slightly. She had worked for him for 11 years and knew his face better than her own. "Does that matter?" "It doesn't matter in the slightest," he said, too quickly. "Make sure his phone no longer accepts her number, and remove her from the employee database and the security system. Backdate a resignation letter. Transfer her final pay in full, down to the last penny. I don't want any employment tribunals later. And Arthur?" Alistair looked out the window at the wet city lights below. The truth, conveniently packaged. That she took the money and left, that there was someone else. He's a man. He'll get over it. Rebecca nodded and left, her heels clicking evenly down the corridor. She never rushed. She had grown up in a terraced house with 2 other families, where you had to book your time for the single bathroom the night before. Since then, she valued 2 things above all else: clean floors and other people's secrets, filed away neatly. She called Arthur herself on the 3rd day, using the same tone one uses to announce a flight delay. "Mr. Beaumont? Clara Meadows asked me to pass on a message. She said not to look for her. She has resigned and left town." "No, she didn't leave any further details." "Yes, I understand this must be upsetting for you." Clara never found out about that conversation. She found out something else. The next morning, her keycard failed at the turnstile. A red light, and nothing else. The security guard, a man named Vic whom she'd greeted every morning for 18 months, looked somewhere over her shoulder and said it was above his pay grade. In HR, they handed her P45 and final payslip, with a termination date of the 21st of April, even though she had been standing by the centrifuge on the 22nd. She called Arthur 14 times. At first, it rang, then it went to a number not in service message. She sent an email. It didn't bounce back, which was somehow worse than if it had. She went to his gated apartment building and stood by the fence for an hour and a half in the light rain. The concierge checked his tablet and said her name wasn't on the visitor list. On the third day, she stopped calling. Not because she had given up, but because she suddenly saw her mother with painful clarity, coming home late, taking off her shoes in the hallway, her face etched with the exhaustion of someone who had spent all day trying to prove something and failed. And how she said nothing. Not that night. Not a year later. Not 20 years later. Clara took the envelope from her bag. It was thick, sealed, and heavy as a book. She placed it on the table under the lamp and just looked at it. Then she picked up a pair of scissors, brought them to the edge, and put them back in the drawer. "I won't open it," she said aloud to the empty room. "Not today, not ever." It wasn't about nobility. It was the only thing she had to hold on to. As long as the envelope was sealed, she hadn't taken anything from them, which meant that whatever happened next was her own. She didn't take long to pack. She gave the keys and half a month's rent to her landlady, Mrs. Higgins, a fussy and cantankerous old woman, surprised her by pressing a jar of homemade jam into her hands. "You're a good lass," she said. "Don't be a stranger. Write to me if you need anything. I've put my address on the lid." Into her bag went 2 jumpers, a waterproof jacket, a pair of trainers, the cardboard folder with her documents, her mother's brooch, the jar of jam, and the envelope, zipped into a side pocket. The train journey took most of the day. Clara dozed on a side-facing seat, waking at every station. She ate biscuits and watched as the city gave way to suburbs, then to countryside, then to nothing but wet fields and bare silver birch trees streaming past in an endless line. The bus station in the market town smelled of diesel and sausage rolls. The timetable was pinned to a plywood board, the destinations hand-painted. Clara read the names from top to bottom, just to have something to focus on. Oakhaven, 6, 30, 11, 40, 17, 05. She took out the folder. On her mother's birth certificate, in the space for place of birth, the same word was written in faded ink. Clara had known this since childhood but had never been there. Her mother never went back, and when asked, would just say, "What's there for me to see?" A single ticket to Oakhaven cost £4.50. Clara paid with her own money, cash she'd withdrawn before her account was closed. That felt important, her own money. The bus ride took an hour and 40 minutes, rattling over the uneven country roads. Outside, fields of last year's stubble stretched away, bordered by wet alder trees lining the drainage ditches. It smelled of petrol and someone's seedlings in a box. The woman opposite was transporting tomato plants, holding the box steady with her knee, the entire journey. Oakhaven appeared suddenly after a sharp bend. A long main street, slate roofs, a water tower, a village shop with a faded sign where the P in provisions hung from a single nail. It was early May, but it was as cold as March. Smoke rose from the chimneys. Clara was the last to get off. She stood for a moment, put her bag on the ground, and looked down the street towards the woods. A woman named Gail rented her a room, just around the corner from the shop, in a cottage with blue window frames. 9 square meters, a bed with a sagging wire base, a bedside table, and a window looking out onto a garden where nothing was yet in bloom. Gail took a month's rent in advance, showed her where the water and the firewood were, and asked, without any real curiosity, just out of politeness, "Staying long?" Clara looked out the window at the bare branches, the grey sky, and the smoke from a neighbour's chimney being pushed sideways by the wind. "I'm having my baby here," she said. Gail was quiet for a moment, then nodded, as if she'd been told the most ordinary thing in the world. "Right then. Know how to work a wood burner?" "I'll learn." "You'll learn," Gail agreed. "Everyone here has to." Rose was born in the first week of December, in the cottage hospital 23 miles from Oakhaven. Clara barely remembered the journey. The contractions started at night. Gail, in a dressing gown over her nightdress, hurried around the kitchen, looking for the number of the on-call paramedic. Eventually she got through to a friend, Kev, who drove the milk lorry. Kev drove them along the rutted lane, apologizing the whole way for the smell of diesel in his cab. The ward had 6 beds and a single, unshaded light bulb over the door that was never turned off. A street lamp stood outside the window, and snow slanted through its beam. In the mornings, the other new mothers received visitors with bags of fruit, yogurts, and cards from their husbands. No one came for Clara. A nurse named Linda, a woman in her 50s with bitten nails, silently placed her own yogurt from the staff fridge on Clara's bedside table on the second day and left without a word. "Thank you," Clara called after her. "Just eat it," Linda replied without turning around. "You need your milk to come in, and you're sitting there like a sparrow in a blizzard. And don't think everyone here has a husband turning up with flowers. That one in bed 4, her fella's been working on the oil rigs for 3 years. Got another family over there. Everyone knows it but her." On the birth certificate they gave her a week later, the space for father's name was blank. For the name, Clara held the pen over the paper for a long time, then wrote, "Rose Eleanor Meadows." The registrar looked at her over the top of her glasses and said nothing. They spent that first winter in the same room with the blue window frames. Clara learned how to stoke the fire so the cottage wouldn't be freezing by morning. She learned to wash nappies in 2 basins and dry them on a line over the stove. She learned to sleep in 40-minute snatches. Her only income was child benefit, and on the 1st of every month she'd lay the cash out on the bed in little piles, for rent, for firewood, for flour and porridge, and for everything else. Everything else was almost always a pile of 0. Gail proved to be a person of few words but great reliability. She didn't coo over the baby or offer unsolicited advice. One night in February, when Rose's temperature spiked and Clara sat up with her all night, Gail brought a second duvet into the room and said, "You lie down, I'll hold her. Don't argue. I've raised 4 and buried 1, so don't give me that look." By spring, Rose was stronger, and Clara went to find work. The Hollies, a residential care home, stood 20 miles away on the shore of an overgrown lake. 3 1950s buildings, terrazzo staircases, plaster molding on the dining room ceiling, and a smell she would come to recognize anywhere: bleach, boiled cabbage, and old linoleum. A staff minibus picked up the cleaners from the village shop at 6:20 a.m. Rose stayed with Gail, and for the first few weeks, Clara spent the entire journey with her forehead pressed against the cold glass, counting the hours until she could go home. She was assigned the first floor, 9,000 square feet, a long corridor, 14 rooms, 2 staircases, and a lounge. By lunchtime, her shoulders ached. By the evening, her feet were throbbing. The head housekeeper, Lucy, would check the corners with her finger and say, "The corners tell you everything." But Clara didn't just clean floors. She watched. She saw the coach arrive with residents on council-funded placements, and how the elderly people, before they'd even taken off their coats, would first ask where the dining room was and what time meals were served. She saw how the dinner lady, Val, would plonk the pudding onto their plates without making eye contact, how the bed linen was changed once every 10 days because the laundry couldn't keep up, leaving greyish tide marks on the sheets, how the administrator, Mrs. Evans, spoke to an 80-year-old woman as if she were a beggar, how the nurse would shout out surnames in the corridor, and people would stand up as if at a military roll call. And she saw something else, how the same grumpy old man from room 16 who had complained all week would thank her, the cleaner, on his last evening because she had greeted him by name every morning and asked how he'd slept. Clara bought a lined notebook and started writing things down. Not thoughts, but facts and figures. The cost of a set of bed linen and its lifespan, the daily food budget per person, how far in advance rooms were booked, and who called the residents themselves or their children. How many people left before their stay was over, and why, what they praised, and what they complained about. By the end of her first winter there, the notebook was half full, and the most important lesson fit on a single line, which Clara wrote in capital letters. People aren't paying for the services, they're paying for someone to remember their name. She worked there for 1 year and 3 months. She had met Eleanor Peters that first winter, when Rose's temperature wouldn't break and the district nurse only visited on Tuesdays. Gail had said, "Go and see Eleanor." 3rd cottage past the water pump, so Clara had walked through the dark, carrying her baby wrapped in a blanket. Eleanor Peters opened the door wearing a cardigan over her dressing gown. She looked at Rose, then at Clara, and said, "Not hello, but don't just stand there. Unwrap her. Put her on the table. I'll get a better light." She was nearly 70. She had worked as the village's sole GP for 39 years before the local practice was closed down 3 years ago. Centralization, they called it. Now there was a weekly nurse visit and a number to call in the nearest town. Eleanor had not handed in her sphygmomanometer, her stethoscope, or her old leather doctor's bag. She hadn't handed in anything at all. People still went to her, and she would take their blood pressure, check their throats, and tell them who needed to get to A&E immediately and who would be fine with a bit of rest. And she never took a penny. Her kitchen was narrow, with a checked oilcloth on the table and an old refrigerator that switched on with a rumble like a tractor starting up under the floorboards. Tom Finch was often sitting there. He was a herbalist, 62, with a spade-like beard and calloused hands. He dried herbs in the attic in paper bags labelled in his mother's handwriting and sold them for a pittance at the Saturday market in town. The conversation that changed everything happened in July, after Clara had quit her job at the Hollies. "The old Forester's Lodge," she said, placing her notebook on the oilcloth. "Beyond the bridge, by the woods. It's empty, isn't it?" Tom Finch snorted into his beard. "It's not empty. It's council property. The roof caved in the winter before last. The nettles in the front room are as tall as I am. They've put it up for auction twice, and no one's bid. No one's that stupid. What are you going to fix the roof with? That notebook of yours?" "With what I earn." Clara opened the notebook and turned it towards them. "Look, 8 rooms. If we make it 6, for 2 people each, that's 12 beds. 3 months of summer, plus the May bank holidays in September. Let's calculate it at a minimum." Eleanor put on her glasses and began to read. She read for a long time, then took them off and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Clara, dear, do you have any idea what you're proposing? This isn't the Cotswolds. The only people who come here are the ones with family in the village. Then people with no family will come." Clara clasped her hands together. "Eleanor, I spent a year scrubbing floors at the Hollies. The food is dreadful, the staff are rude, and they charge a fortune for it. And people still go, because there's nowhere else. I don't want to be like them. I want a place where someone can arrive, be greeted by name, fed a decent meal, and then be left in peace. That's it. Nothing more." "And what do you need me for?" Eleanor asked. "I'm 68. Because you know everyone here, and everyone listens to you. And because if someone falls ill, I want someone nearby who knows whether to call an ambulance or not. Not to treat them, just to know." Tom Finch slowly placed a jar of dried meadowsweet he'd been turning in his hands onto the table. "So there'll be herbal tea, then. It will be offered as a drink, with a meal, not as medicine. Tom, this is the most important thing, and I'll only say it once. We do not treat anyone. We are a guest house. We provide food, warmth, and quiet. If anyone, ever, says to a guest, 'Drink this, it will cure you,' I will ask them to leave that same day. I don't care who it is." Tom looked at her carefully, as if seeing her for the first time. "You're a tough one. I'm a careful one." The auction was set for September. Clara went to the council offices in her only smart jumper, sat in a corridor for 40 minutes, and the whole thing was over in 4. There were no other bidders. The old Forester's Lodge and its land were sold for the starting price of £21,000, with a payment plan over 3 years, £583, and 33 pence a month, 36 times. Clara would come to know that number, like a multiplication table. There was no key. You could open the front door by lifting it at the corner. The repairs took all winter and half the spring. The new roof ate up everything she had saved from her job at the Hollies, plus another £8,000 she had to borrow from Gail on a handshake. The floor joists on the ground floor were rotten. She and Paul, Tom's 20-year-old son, replaced them. Paul had spent all of January complaining he was going to leave for a job on the rigs, but he hauled timber better than any man twice his age. An old man named George, a retired builder from the next village with only one lung, rebuilt the chimney flue. He charged her £300 instead of £600, and when Clara tried to argue, he said, "You thank Eleanor. Back in '98, she carried my Mary 8 miles on her back to the main road in the middle of a blizzard. So don't you start counting pennies with me." By then, Rose was walking and talking, and she would toddle around the building site in a pair of wellies and one of Clara's old woolly hats pulled down to her eyebrows. Her main job was to move nails from one box to another. Clara tackled the paperwork with the same determination she'd tackled the roof. She registered as a sole trader, got planning permission for a change of use to a guest house, filed all the necessary notices, started a guest register, drew up a 2-page rental agreement, bought a visitor's book, and started a folder for all food receipts, including a contract with the local farmer's wife for milk, because the milk had to be accounted for. Eleanor grumbled that she was going mad with all the bureaucracy. Clara's response was always the same: "Better I go mad than they show up and find something." Paul burned the sign himself, onto a plank from an old barn. The Old Forester's Lodge, guest house. The G was crooked, but they left it that way. The first guests arrived at the beginning of June. 2 teachers from the local town, Olga and Tamara, booked a room for 6 days because it was cheap and because one of them had grown up in a nearby village. Clara hadn't slept for 2 nights. She served them a simple dinner: new potatoes with butter and mint, a salad with pickled onions, local cheese, crusty bread from the village baker, and a jug of cold elderflower cordial. She spent the entire meal standing in the kitchen doorway, clutching a tea towel. The teachers left, returned in August, wrote a page and a half in the visitor's book, and told everyone in town about the place. In July, a family came with their 8-year-old son, an asthmatic named Kieran. The mother, a thin, anxious woman, caught Clara in the corridor on the 2nd day. "Miss Meadows, could you perhaps make him some sort of herbal tea? I was told you have a herbalist here. Something to help his breathing." "I won't do that," Clara said it gently, but didn't look away. "This is a guest house. I'm not licensed to do anything of the sort. You have his inhaler with you, I hope. If anything changes, the hospital is 40 minutes away. The on-call doctor's number is on the fridge, but he'll be sleeping with his window open here, and that's probably the best thing I can offer you." The boy didn't have a single asthma attack at night all week. On leaving, his mother wrote in the book that the air here heals, and Clara had to ask her to cross the word out. The woman was offended, and struck it through so hard the ink bled through the page. Marcus Thorne appeared at the end of August. He called the day before, saying he needed a week of quiet, and arrived on the village bus with a backpack and an old leather briefcase that he never once opened in her presence. He was about 45, with grey at his temples and hands that hadn't seen city life. In the guest register, under occupation, he wrote unemployed and underlined it. Clara handed him the registration form. He got to the line with her surname, paused, and sat staring at the page for a long time, as if deciphering bad handwriting. Then he signed, went out onto the porch, and chain-smoked half a pack of cigarettes, staring into the darkness beyond the woodpile. Clara assumed he was just exhausted and went to bed. The next morning, he silently dismantled and repaired the water pump, which had been groaning and failing to draw water for 3 weeks. "You don't owe me anything for this," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "I need something to occupy my days, otherwise I start to think." The good thing about working with metal is that it doesn't ask questions. He stayed for 2 weeks, then a month, then stopped talking about leaving. He chopped wood, fixed the wiring, and took over the bookkeeping. Within 6 months, he knew the supplier's prices better than Clara did. He was wonderful with Rose, as if it were the most important part of his day. He carved her little boats and floated them in the water butt, and Rose called him simply Marcus and would pull him by the finger to show him a particularly interesting stone. One day in October, Eleanor asked him to take a look at a neighbour who was short of breath. Marcus put down his axe, wiped his forehead with his sleeve, and said evenly, staring at the ground, "I'm not a doctor, Eleanor. Call the surgery in town." "Marcus, I'm not blind. I can see how you hold your hands." "I am not a doctor," he repeated, and walked off to the shed. The sound of hammering came from it until evening. By December, Rose had turned 3. The guest house was humming with life. Both stoves were lit. 3 lines of laundry flapped in the yard. The booking diary had names in it until August of the following year, and for the first time, Clara had enough money in her account to cover the mortgage payments and her staff, with some left over. That evening, she took down a tin biscuit box with daisies on the lid from the top of the wardrobe. Inside were the cardboard folder of documents, her mother's brooch with the green stone, and the white envelope thick, sealed and untouched. Clara held it in her hands, turned it over, looked at the neat line of adhesive, then put it back, closed the lid, and placed the box back on the shelf behind a stack of clean sheets. The first official letter arrived at the end of January, a standard envelope addressed to the parish council, but inside was a notice of an unscheduled inspection. The reason stated, "A complaint from a member of the public regarding the suspected practice of unlicensed medical activities at the address of the former Forester's Lodge. The complaint was anonymous but professionally worded, citing specific regulations. It claimed that the guest house was admitting sick people, serving them curative decoctions, and employing a doctor." Clara read the notice 3 times, standing in the porch without taking her coat off. Then she took everything from the metal filing box: her business registration, public liability insurance, the guest register, copies of all guest agreements, receipts for the past 18 months, food hygiene certificates, and waste disposal contracts. She laid them all out on the table in the order she expected they would be requested. Marcus came in, looked at the table, and then stood with his back to her, staring out the window. Clara noticed he had his hands in his pockets, something she'd never seen him do before. "Marcus, are you afraid of paperwork?" "I'm not afraid of paperwork," he said. "I know how it's made, that's all." He turned around. "When everything is in order, they come 3 times, and then they get tired of it. They came 5 times in 3 weeks. First came the environmental health officer from the district council. She inspected the kitchen, the fridges, the color-coded chopping boards, the temperature logs. The woman, wearing glasses, opened a cupboard and saw the paper bags of dried herbs. "And what's this?" "Blackcurrant leaf, linden blossom, meadowsweet, mint. We infuse it to make a beverage and serve it with meals. Here's the menu. Here's the invoice from the supplier. He's a registered sole trader. It's all above board. Do you tell the guests it's medicinal?" "I tell the guests it's delicious." Clara produced the folder of guest agreements. "Please look at Clause 9. We explicitly state that the guest house does not provide medical services or health recommendations. Every guest signs to acknowledge this." The woman read Clause 9 twice and looked at Clara differently after that. Next was the fire and rescue service. A wheezing fire marshal climbed all over the attic and issued a notice for new fire doors and a smoke detector in the loft. Clara bought the doors that day, and Paul hung them that evening. Then came an inquiry from HMRC about her cash payments to the milk supplier. Then the local policeman, P.C. Davies, a man no longer young, wearing his uniform jacket over a woolly jumper. He sat in the kitchen, declined a cup of tea, and took out a form. "Clara," he said, "I'll be straight with you. There's been a complaint that you're treating patients here. I've been the bobby in this parish for 20 years, and I know who's practicing without a license. There are 3 old dears who do a bit of faith healing and 1 chap who's a bone setter. I've never heard a peep about you, but I have to follow up. Just tell me honestly, has anyone here so much as taken someone's blood pressure?" Clara answered immediately, because it was a question she had asked herself more than once. Eleanor did, once. A guest felt faint in the August heat wave. "I told her afterwards that if she ever took her blood pressure monitor out in this house again, I wouldn't let her back in. She was offended and didn't speak to me for 3 days. P.C. Davies, I'm not an idiot. I know how that story ends." The policeman slowly screwed the cap back on his pen. "Right then. I'll tell you this for nothing. Complaints like this don't just appear out of thin air. They get written when someone wants something. The most difficult was the official review board in mid-February. 3 officials from the district, 2 from the county, with folders and a dictaphone. They leafed through the visitor's book, page by page, and stopped at the entry from August. The one where Kieran's mother had written that the place heals, and then crossed it out so hard the ink had torn the paper. What was written here? The word was heals. I asked her to remove it. "Why?" "Because it's not true," Clara said. "We don't heal. We feed and we care." The boy slept with his window open for a week and he felt better, and his mother mistook that for a cure. It took a great deal of effort not to offend her, and judging by the pressure of her pen, I failed. One of the county officials grunted. Mr. Carmichael appeared between the 2nd and 3rd inspections. His car was a sleek, grey saloon with city plates, and he parked it carefully to avoid the mud. He was polite, in his 40s, wearing a jacket that cost more than their new roof. "Miss Meadows, I represent an investment group. We're looking at this area for a large-scale wellness resort. 40 rooms, a swimming pool, a medical wing. We need your property. It's not for sale." He smiled, as if she'd said something predictable and charming. 800,000, think about it for a week. A week later, he offered 1.5 million. 10 days after that, following the review board, he offered 2.5 million, and added that he could discuss a management position for her. "Mr. Carmichael, I spent 2 years pulling this house out of the mud. Old George, who's 70 and has 1 lung, rebuilt that chimney. Paul, who wanted to go and work on the rigs, replaced those floorboards. I can't sell the people who built it. People," he said softly, "are usually easier to buy than properties. Then you've come to the wrong address." He left without slamming his car door. He did everything neatly. That night, someone tore down the fence along the road. 32 fence posts, ripped out of the ground, and 2 horizontal rails snapped in half. The guest house sign was untouched. Neat people. In the morning, Clara came out and saw the damage in the grey light. The first thing she did wasn't to cry or call the police, but to start counting the broken posts to know how many to buy. By the time she reached the 3rd dozen, her hands were shaking so badly she had to squat down on the frozen ground. She stayed there until Marcus came and lifted her up by the elbow. "Let's go inside. I'll finish counting. We'll count later. Clara, I'm asking you, please come inside. Your lips are blue, and stop pretending you don't care. I care, and I don't consider it a weakness. By evening, the whole of Oakhaven knew about the fence. Tom Finch went door to door himself, starting at the far end of the village, and said the same thing to everyone. That lass has built a home, she's paying her dues, she hires locals in the summer, buys her milk from Katie, her spuds from the Matthews farm, her bread from the baker, and now they're trying to run her out of town for a swimming pool. Eleanor Peters wrote a letter to the council by hand and spent 3 days taking it around for signatures. She collected 109 in a village with a population of just over 200, including infants. The men came on Saturday, 5 of them, with planks and a chainsaw. They built a new fence in a single day, stronger than the old one, and refused to take any money. The old women went to the council offices themselves. No one had asked them to. They found out when the next meeting was and arrived at 9 in the morning, 8 of them, with walking sticks and headscarves, and each one brought a piece of paper, written in a shaky hand, stating that no one at the old Foresters' Lodge had treated them, given them medicine, or promised any cures, but that on the spring bank holiday they had been given cakes and driven on a day trip to the seaside. Clara stood in the corridor of the council building and watched as old Polly, 90 years old, handed her note to the receptionist and said loudly, because she was hard of hearing, "You make a note of this, dearie. She's one of ours. Why are you pestering her? She's a Meadows, her grandmother's lot. Their cottage was over the river, by the willows. Their Nina, she went off to the city to study when she was 16, with just one suitcase, and never came back. But her granddaughter did." Clara leaned against the wall and stayed there. She had known from a piece of paper that her mother was born here. That she was remembered here by name was something she heard for the first time in her life. The inspections ended in early March. Not a single substantive violation was found. 2 minor fire safety recommendations, both rectified. The case was closed. 2 weeks later, Rose got sick. It started ordinarily enough. A runny nose, a cough, a temperature of 37.3. Eleanor came, listened to her chest, and said her throat was clear, and it looked like a common cold. On the 3rd day, her temperature shot up to 39 and wouldn't come down. By evening, Rose had stopped playing, lay on her side, and was breathing in short, shallow gasps, like a trapped bird. Outside, the weather had been chaotic for 3 days. A daytime thaw with rain had caused the river to swell, washing away the approach to the bridge. The lane had turned into a quagmire of hub-deep ruts. Then, towards nightfall, a sudden frost hit, and a blizzard began to blow snow horizontally across the fields. Clara got through to the emergency services at 11:30. "Oakhaven," the dispatcher repeated. "Miss, the main A road is closed. The gritter is out, but the snow is drifting faster than they can clear it. A paramedic will be dispatched as soon as the road is passable. The forecast says that should be towards dawn. The air ambulance can't fly in this weather. My child is 3 years old. She's struggling to breathe. Her temperature is over 40. I've logged the call. I understand completely. I can't get anyone to you any sooner." Eleanor walked the mile from her cottage in Wellingtons and a heavy coat. The moment she stepped inside, she ordered Clara to open a window a crack and remove the extra blanket. She listened to Rose's back, counted her breaths, saw how the skin was being sucked in between her ribs with each gasp, and straightened up. Her face had changed. "Clara, this isn't a cold. It's hair lungs. We need to get her to the main road. A car can meet us there. We can't carry her." Eleanor gripped her shoulders. "She can't be taken out in this cold with her breathing like this. It's a 40-minute walk, knee-deep in snow. You'll take one child out there, and you'll bring a different one back." Marcus was standing in the doorway. He had been there for a few minutes. Clara turned to him and said nothing, because she didn't know how to ask. He looked at the tiny chest under the rabbit print pajamas heaving up and down. Then he left the room. They heard him go up the stairs to his room, the sound of something being moved, and him coming back down. He returned with a bag Clara had never seen before. It was dark, scuffed leather with 2 clasps. He placed it on a stool, opened it, and inside, everything was laid out with the precision of a man who had spent 20 years packing and repacking the same items without ever being allowed to use them. "Clara," he said, without turning around, "if I do this now, I will be violating a court order. I am legally barred from practicing medicine. I need you to hear this from me, not from strangers later. And if something goes wrong, I won't be able to explain it to you, and you will have to live with that for the rest of your life. Marcus." Clara stood between him and the door. "She used to bring you her little boats to show you. You were the only one she trusted with her favorite stones. Start." He washed his hands and forearms over a basin, for a long time, and everything he did after that was in silence. The night stretched on like a freight train. Eleanor held a torch and passed him things. Marcus clipped a small device to Rose's finger, and numbers glowed on its tiny screen. All night, the adults watched those numbers as if they were watching for a leak in a boat. At first, they dropped. Then they held steady. Then, around 4 in the morning, they crept up by a single digit, and Eleanor sank to the floor by the bed and started rubbing her knees. Clara sat at the foot of the bed all night, holding her daughter's foot. She couldn't hold her hand. Marcus needed access to her arms. The foot was hot and tiny, and Clara cupped it in both her hands and spoke to her quietly. About nothing in particular, about how they would go picking wild strawberries in the summer, and how Paul had promised to build a swing, and about the little boats. By 6 in the morning, her breathing was more even. At 7, Rose opened her eyes, looked blearily at Marcus, and said, "Drink." Paul arrived on his tractor, having cleared a path, and took Eleanor home. On the porch, she turned and said one word to Marcus. "Thank you." The ambulance from the town finally made it by 8:30. A young doctor examined Rose, looked at the notes Marcus had kept on a sheet of notebook paper, and asked who had written them. "A retired GP," Clara said. "Eleanor Peters." The doctor looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking out the window. They took Rose to the hospital to recover, and Clara went with her. But the conversation happened that same morning, before they left, on the veranda, as the ambulance waited by the gate. Marcus was sitting on the bench, still in his work coat. On his knees was that same old leather briefcase with the scuffed corners. He placed 2 yellow documents in a plastic sleeve on the table between them. "Clara, I'm about to tell you something, and you will most likely ask me to leave. I want you to hear it today, because today I can still say it. Go on. 24 years ago, I was a junior doctor at a city hospital." He spoke evenly, as if reading a prepared statement. "Surgery, 4th floor. A man died one night, 41 years old, post-op. He died because the on-call registrar made a prescribing error. The registrar was 34, well regarded. His father was on the health authority board. His name was Beaumont." Clara didn't move. Everything was recorded in the treatment room log. The time, the drug, the dose, who prescribed it. The record was made by the nurse, the only person on that shift who wrote down exactly what happened and refused to be persuaded otherwise. Her name was Nina Meadows. Outside, water dripped from the eaves. The patient's chart was rewritten overnight. They needed someone to corroborate the new version. I was called into an office and it was explained to me that I was just a junior, that I had my whole life ahead of me, and that this story had no future anyway. I signed the false statement. I was 25 years old, and after that, she was the one who was blamed. They dragged her through a disciplinary committee. They wrote that she had mixed up the medication. They forced her out of that hospital, then the next, and the one after that. At the time, I thought she was silent because she had nothing to say. I only understood later that she was silent because no one would have believed her. He pushed the plastic sleeve to the middle of the table, the original prescription sheet and the first version of the patient's chart. I took them from the doctor's office that night before they could be destroyed, and I've kept them for 24 years. 5 years ago, I went to Beaumont and told him I wanted to bring this to light. 3 months later, a complaint of malpractice was filed against me by a patient I had never even met. Then came the court case and the ruling against me. The person who handled it all was a woman named Rebecca Shaw. Your broken fence and your anonymous complaint, that was probably her too. She always sends the paperwork first, then the buyer. Clara was silent for so long that a whole sheet of snow slid off the roof outside. "So why did he throw me out?" she finally asked. He wasn't talking about equals. He was talking about equals, but he was thinking about a surname. Marcus rubbed his face with his hand. He saw a Meadows who would marry into his family, bear his grandchild, and one day might start looking through old papers. "He didn't get rid of you because you were poor, Clara. He was afraid of you." Clara stood up, went into the living room, and came back with a tin biscuit box with daisies on the lid. She took off the lid, moved aside the cardboard folder and the brooch with the green stone, and took out the white envelope. Thick, sealed, and untouched for 4 years. She placed it on the table next to Marcus's yellow documents. The 2 envelopes lay side by side, and both were about the same thing. "You don't have to leave," Clara said. "Now, you absolutely must not leave." Rose was discharged at the beginning of April, thin and bright. The first thing she did was check that her little boats were still safe in the water butt. 3 days later, Clara and Marcus drove to the county town to see a solicitor, a contact from Olga, one of the teachers who had been their very first guest. The solicitor, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, read the documents for 40 minutes without once looking up. Then she took off her glasses. I'll tell you the bad news first. You won't get a criminal case against Beaumont himself. After 24 years, the statute of limitations has expired. This isn't the kind of case where that can be waived. If you want to see him in prison, it won't happen. I don't want to see him in prison. Then what do you want? Clara placed her hand on the yellowed page. I want the official record to state who was at fault. My mother lived with this for 30 years. She was forced out of 3 hospitals. She died, believing she had made a fatal error. I want there to be, somewhere, just one official piece of paper that says she did not make a mistake. The solicitor paused, then turned her gaze to Marcus. And you understand that your testimony is an admission of falsifying documents? You're implicating yourself. I've lived with this for 24 years, Marcus said. The only difference is that until now, I've lived with it alone. The papers were filed at the end of April. A formal complaint to the police, a petition to the court to review Marcus's case in light of new evidence, notarized copies, the originals submitted under seal. And so began a long, quiet process that no one in Oakhaven knew about, except for Eleanor. Meanwhile, the guest house became famous throughout the region. That winter, the county newspaper had run a story about how a village of 200 people had fought off developers to save a local guest house. There was a photo of the men building the new fence, with old George walking along it, tapping each post with his stick. The story was picked up by a national paper, and then a crew from a television channel came to film a segment for a show about rural tourism that works. By May, the booking diary was full for the next year. Clara hired 2 more women from the village to work in the kitchen, and Paul stopped talking about the oil rigs and started talking about a second building. The 3 cars arrived on a Thursday in mid-June, around noon. Clara was in the back garden hanging out laundry, and she first heard not the engines, but the silence. The chatter in the yard had suddenly stopped. She came around the corner of the house with an empty laundry basket. 3 cars were parked by the gate. People were already getting out of the first one. A young man with a clipboard, a woman in a smart blazer, a cameraman with a camera on his shoulder. From the second, grey car, Mr. Carmichael was emerging. He saw Clara and was the first to look away. And from the third car stepped Alistair Beaumont. He had aged, not stooped or grown heavier, just aged. The skin over his cheekbones seemed thinner, and he wore different glasses now, with thick frames. He was walking towards the porch, saying something over his shoulder to someone about format and an authentic story, and that there was no need to film today. Then he looked up. Clara was standing on the bottom step, in an apron over her dress, the laundry basket on her hip, watching him. Alistair stopped dead. He opened his mouth but made no sound. He stood like that for a moment, then took a half step back, as if the ground beneath his foot had given way, and reached for a handrail that wasn't there. "Hello, Alistair," Clara said. "What have you come for?" He didn't answer. The woman in the blazer started to explain something about a charitable foundation and a partnership program, but her voice trailed off because someone was already walking past her. Arthur got out of the third car last and stopped about 10 paces away. He wasn't looking at Clara. In the yard, by the woodpile, a little girl in red Wellington boots was squatting down, arranging wood chips in neat rows. Her hair was fair, but her eyebrows were dark and straight, and she was frowning in concentration, the exact same way he himself had frowned in all the childhood photos his mother had hung in the hallway. "Mummy," the girl said, without turning around, "are those men coming to stay with us?" Arthur slowly turned his head to look at his father. The conversation by the woodpile happened 20 minutes later, after Clara had taken Rose over to Eleanor's. Marcus had led the others to the veranda and put a jug of water in front of them. Arthur stood with his hands hanging by his sides. He had changed too. He was thinner, with a few days' stubble. He was wearing an ordinary, nondescript jacket. "How old is she?" "She'll be 4 soon." "Clara." He swallowed. "They told me you took the money and left with someone else. They told me that the day it happened, your number was disconnected. You were gone from the company database. HR said you'd resigned the week before. I spent a month feeling like an idiot, then 2 months drinking, then I stopped. And you didn't think to look for me?" "I tried." He looked straight at her. "For 6 months. I found your landlady, Mrs. Higgins. She said you'd left, and didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't know where else to look. And, if I'm being honest, I believed my father. It was easier that way. I've spent the last 2 years paying myself back for that. And you know how it ended. I left. I work in a local NHS practice now. 800 patients on my list. And I got the job myself, without the family name. Then why are you here? I was told we were looking at a potential site for a project. I thought my father was trying to buy something again. He ran a hand over his face. Clara, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know she existed. Clara took a folded piece of paper from her apron pocket and handed it to him. It was a copy of the birth certificate she had been carrying back and forth to town for a month. Arthur unfolded it and read. In the space for father's name was a single line. He turned away towards the woodpile and stood like that for a long time. What can I do? Don't do anything. Not yet, Clara said. She's 3.5. She doesn't know the word daddy in any context other than other people's. If you show up now with toys and big promises, you'll be doing it for you, not for her. If you want to be her father, come on Saturdays, without presents. And don't promise her anything out loud until you're sure you can keep that promise 300 times in a row. Alistair was sitting alone on the veranda. Marcus had taken the others to look at the grounds. Clara placed the tin biscuit box on the table in front of him, opened it, took out the white envelope, and laid it down. It was thick, sealed, slightly creased at one corner. There was no tear, no sign of it ever having been steamed open. Take it, it's yours. Alistair looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. 4 years, he said at last, his voice dry. You never opened it. No. I paid for the new roof with a loan at 14% interest, and this lay in my wardrobe behind the bedsheets. Sometimes I would take it out and look at it. It helped me a great deal, Alistair. You have no idea how much. As long as it was sealed, I didn't owe anyone anything. He took off his glasses and began to clean them. Clara remembered seeing him make that same gesture in the glass-fronted cafe in the rain, 4 years ago. You know, he said. I know. Nina Meadows, staff nurse, the night of the 12th of October. She wrote down what happened, and for that, she was dragged through a disciplinary committee like a fool, while you became who you are. Clara's voice was calm, and her calmness made him stare down at the table. The complaint was filed in April. The original documents are with the authorities. My solicitor explained that because of the time that has passed, you won't be charged, and I've accepted that. I don't want you in prison. I want one piece of paper that says my mother made no mistake. What I want from you is that you do not interfere. That's all. Don't make any calls. Don't try to fix it. Don't send any more polite men to tear down my fence. You try anything, just once, and this story goes to people who will make sure 6 million others read it. And I really don't want that, because I have guests' children playing on the swings here. He was silent for a long time. Then he finally asked about what he had come for: the partnership, the foundation, the money for a second building. On my terms, Clara said. In writing, I retain operational control. Your share will be less than 50%, with no option to increase it. There will be no medical services on this land, not a single treatment, not one mention of the word wellness in any advertising. The kitchen, the staff, and the prices are mine. Your family name will not be on the sign, and I can buy out your share at any time, according to a formula we will agree upon in advance. I have my own solicitor. Do you agree? Come back with the paperwork in July. And if I don't agree, then I'll build the second building 3 years later. I'm good at waiting. I have experience. He picked up the envelope from the table and held it, as if weighing it. Then he put it back down. You should keep it. No, Clara said. For 4 years I've taken nothing from you. Don't start now. Rebecca Shaw got out of the car only once, as everyone was preparing to leave, and only because a signature was needed on a travel form. She saw Marcus by the woodpile, axe in hand, in an old shirt. Marcus straightened up and looked at her. Rebecca's expression didn't change. She walked to the car, placed her folder on the bonnet, signed the paper, and only then said, still looking down, Marcus, I was looking for you. I know, Rebecca. That's why I stayed away from the city. You shouldn't have started this. It's all ancient history. Nobody's interested. She clicked her pen shut. You'll only make things worse for yourself. You're not 25 anymore. I'm not 25, Marcus agreed. That's the whole point. At 25 I signed. Now, I won't. She got into the car and closed the door softly. She did everything neatly. And watching her, Clara understood where Mr. Carmichael had learnt it. The court case against Rebecca Shaw was held that autumn in the county town and lasted 4 months. Forgery of documents and knowingly making a false report, on 2 counts. The case brought to light 3 other people she had similarly dealt with over the years. 2 of them came to testify voluntarily, without being subpoenaed. Alistair Beaumont never once appeared in court. In February, he sold 2 of his clinics and stepped down from the board of directors. The verdict against Marcus was overturned in December, in light of the new evidence. It took another 6 months of accreditation boards, committees, and paperwork for his medical license to be reinstated. Clara drove with him to the city 11 times, because a man who has considered himself guilty for 24 years cannot be left to navigate those corridors alone. The letter about her mother arrived in March. A plain envelope, standard typeface, 3 paragraphs. A formal conclusion stating that the findings of the internal investigation of such and such a date were based on falsified documents, and that the conclusions regarding staff nurse Nina Meadows were to be rescinded. Clara read it on the porch, a heavy coat thrown over her shoulders, then folded it and placed it in the tin biscuit box, next to the brooch with the green stone. The second building opened in May. 6 rooms, a wide porch, and a ramp, because guests in wheelchairs were now coming. Paul had carved a new sign, but had deliberately copied the crooked G from the old one, and Clara asked him to leave it that way. And across the road from the village shop, a new modular GP surgery was installed that same month. The council provided the land and the funding for a position. The foundation provided the equipment. Clara had insisted on it as a clause in her contract, the 4th one down. Dr. Marcus Thorne. Nurse practitioner. Eleanor Peters, who by then was 72 and, when offered a part-time position, had replied that people get sick full-time, so they need to be treated full-time. They put up a standard blue sign on the door, and next to it at the entrance they fixed a second, smaller plaque, in memory of Nina Meadows, SRN. About 50 people came to the opening. Tom Finch brought 2 buckets of peonies. Old Polly stood in the front row, explaining to everyone whose granddaughter was whose, and George walked along the new porch, tapping the boards with his stick. Clara hadn't intended to speak, but they pushed her forward. "I'll be brief," she said, her voice catching at first, then steadying. "My mother's name is on that plaque. Nina Meadows. She was from this village, from over the river, by the willows. For 30 years, she was considered to be at fault, and she was silent, because back then, no one would have believed her. Today, finally, the story is written down correctly. That's all I wanted to say." Marcus saw his first patient that same afternoon, old Mr. Matthews, 81, for his blood pressure. Marcus, in a crisp shirt he had ironed himself the night before, sat down at his desk. He took his new stethoscope, hung it around his neck, and then found he couldn't start writing for a long time because the new pen wouldn't work. Arthur came on Saturdays, 47 Saturdays in a row, before Rose, unprompted, took his hand to cross the little bridge. That autumn, he transferred to the local town's medical practice, rented a room there, and when Clara asked him directly if he was hoping for something more, he answered honestly. He was, but he would wait as long as she told him to, and even if she didn't, he wasn't going anywhere. Alistair came in July, alone, in a taxi. He didn't come into the house. He sat on the bench by the gate for 2 hours, until Rose, having circled him at a wide distance about 15 times, finally approached and asked whose granddad he was. "Nobody's, yet," he said. After that, he came 3 or 4 times a year, and always sat on that bench. Clara never chased him away, but she never invited him in. He had exactly what he had earned, and not a step more. The evening after the opening, the 3 of them sat on the porch. Rose had fallen asleep on Clara's lap, a piece of cake still in her hand. "Clara," Marcus said, "I think I should probably apply for the staff accommodation that comes with the surgery. It doesn't feel right, taking up a room here. Every room is an income for you." Clara adjusted Rose's collar. "Marcus, don't," she said. "And please, stop calling me Miss Meadows. It's been 4 years." He didn't answer right away. He looked at her, then at the sleeping child, then at the still light sky over the forest, and nodded once. A cool breeze drifted up from the river. Across the bridge, in the darkening fields, someone started a motorcycle, then cut the engine. A light was on in a window of the second building. New guests had arrived from the city, 3 women, and they would need to be shown where the kettle was, and where to find the light switch. Clara stood up, shifting her daughter's weight in her arms, and went inside.